great pleasure of introducing our special guest today, Frida Kahlo.
Bienvenidos. Welcome. Thank you all for coming today. It's so great to be here among the living. I'm Frida Kahlo, as I suppose most of you know. And, well, it's really surprising and pleasing to see that I'm still somewhat of a celebrity after all these years. It's quite wonderful to see, particularly because there have been so many stories told about me throughout my lifetime and then continuing long after, almost 60 years so far. And I love stories. Of course, all of this legacy is due in no small part to my own creation and encouraging of mythologies about myself while I was living. So, you see, I'm a storyteller myself. I've even been called La Gran Ocultadora, the Great Pretender. The exhibition of my photographs, that's now on display here, the research, the interpretation, all of my things, it's just a continuation of this evolving story. Not only a reinvention, but a discovery of who I am. When I died in 1954, my husband, Diego Rivera, who some of you may know, the Mexican muralist, he decided to donate the house that we lived in together, which I grew up in, La Casa Azul, to the people of Mexico so that it would be converted into a museum celebrating my work. And shortly before he died in 1957, he took a number of my personal belongings and sealed them away in the bathroom of La Casa Azul. He then asked his friend Lola Olmedo not to open the sealed bathroom until 15 years had gone by after his death. At that time, Lola decided that since her friend Diego did not wish to open the bathroom, then neither would she. And so it was finally opened nearly 50 years later. And what was once a collection of my most private things, my photographs, my mementos, my diary, my letters, my girdles and dresses, is now public. So my story begins in 1907, the year I was born, supposedly, in Coyoacan, a suburb of Mexico City, at the time way on the outskirts. This is me at age 2, and this was a photograph taken by my father. I'm going to start with my mother. This is her as a little girl with my grandmother, Isabel. I had a really good relationship with my mother, contrary to some stories out there. We had a loving relationship, but there was one thing that we could not agree on, and that was religion. My mother was a great friend to me, but the religious things never brought us close together. She would reach the point of hysteria for her religion, and that caused us problems later, you could say. This is my mother, Matilda Calderon. She was born in Oaxaca. This is her in 1919. Another photograph by my father, Guillermo Kahlo. And the inscription at the bottom says, "When you see this portrait, remember how much your mother loved each one of you." Her parents, shown here, my grandmother was Spanish, and my grandfather was mestizo, so mixed with the indigenous peoples of Mexico. So my mother is the one who directly connects me to the land and people that I love and so strongly identify with. In this photograph of my mother with her paternal family, she's dressed in the traditional Tijuana dress, clearly influenced by her father's mestizo background. This dress is important because it's the traditional way of dressing for women in the Isthmus of Tehuantepec in the state of Oaxaca. And their society is a matriarchal society, and the women there are known for their beauty, their intelligence, their strong character. The women there run the fiscal matters, the markets. And so I identified with these strong women and adopted this form of dress for myself because I wanted to be seen in that light. I also only started dressing this way after I married Diego Rivera. Here's my father, Guillermo Kahlo. He's a German immigrant, a photographer, and he was commissioned early on by the Mexican government to document the colonial architecture there. And his father was also a photographer. And so I was close to photography from the very beginning. I watched my father work, I often helped him in the darkroom, and then of course I was also a subject in his photographs. He created a series of self-portraits throughout the course of his life. He was very interested in the self-portrait genre, and this also influenced me in my own work and my own art. One of the very first paintings that I did was a self-portrait, and then I continued to paint self-portraits for the rest of my life. Here's some more portraits of my father, Guillermo. And here in this photograph from 1925, that was given to me, it says, "From time to time, try to remember how much your father loves you." And here I am painting a portrait of my father in 1951. And I'm painting from a photograph that he made of himself with his camera. So my father was German, came from German parents, and immigrated to Mexico. Here's a wedding picture of my parents from 1898. And here you see those photographs translated into my painting. And so I used my photographs as sources for my work and a guide. This painting is titled My Grandparents, My Parents, and I, Family Tree, from 1936. So on the right is my German father and his parents by the sea. And on the left is my Mexican mother and her parents by the land. I made this painting shortly after the Nuremberg laws were passed by Hitler in Germany forbidding interracial marriage. And it's made in the format of genealogical charts used by the Nazis to advocate racial purity. So I've used it to affirm my mixed origins, which deeply influenced my life and my work. Here I am at age 12. On the back, however, I wrote age 9. So I later changed my birthday from 1907. In my diary, I wrote it as 1910 to coincide with the year of the start of the Mexican Revolution. And because then I could say I was younger. So this is an X-ray from 1925. So at the age of 18, I was in a horrible, traumatic car accident when a truck hit the bus that I was riding in. And my abdomen was pierced by an iron bar. And my spine, my pelvis, my right foot and leg were all fractured in several places. On top of that, I was born with spina bifida, which is unfused vertebra, and I had polio at age 6. So by the time I died, I'd had over 35 operations. And this was a very important development in my career as an artist. So here I am in Traction. This is from 1940, a photograph by Nicholas Murray. And here I am painting in my bed with Miguel Covarrubias in the background, another painter and a good friend of mine from 1940. So I was confined to bed in order to heal, and that's when I began to paint. My father had given me an easel and his old painting supplies. And the funny thing is, at this time, I was studying to be a doctor. Life had different plans for me, however. Although, in a way, I did get to pursue my medical career, since I spent my entire life in and out of doctors' offices and hospitals. Pain was not a stranger to me. For me, pain equaled art. My pain and my broken body confined me so often to my bed that I painted because I had to. And as I wrote later on, I paint self-portraits because I am so often alone, because I am the subject that I know best. So in 1926, my father made a series of portraits of me. And this is at the Casa Azul with various friends and my sister. And in this photograph, you'll see my classic stance, the way I learned to portray myself through photographs. When my father took my picture after the accident, I knew that a battlefield of suffering was in my eyes. And so from then on, I started looking straight at the lens, unflinching, unsmiling, determined to show that I was a good fighter to the end. (1932), another photograph by my father. And this is a portrait taken in 1926. That I later gave to Diego Rivera shortly before we were married. In 1927, I joined the Communist Party. Politics played a large role in my life, and it was through my association with the Communist Party that I met Diego. So Diego Rivera, this is a photograph from 1933. He was the love of my life, although there were many others, and also the other big accident in my life. He and I were married in August of 1929. I was 22, and he was 42. He was an atheist, so that pissed my mother off, and she did not approve, besides him being fat and old. Diego had already been married twice, and he was already a well-known muralist, known even beyond the confines of the art world and beyond Mexico. As is fairly well known, our relationship was volatile and passionate, to say the least. Yes, he was unfaithful many times, but I can't say that I didn't have my share of affairs. For me, art and love was a way to reinvent myself, to overcome the confines of my injured body and my internal struggle. But he was truly the one I couldn't live without. We were like two halves of a whole, him painting the outward representation of Mexico, and me representing the internal emotional struggle. In 1939, he and I divorced, and I painted my first large painting, The Two Fridas. This painting, like much of my work, is about identity. On the left, I'm dressed in European costume, and on the right, in traditional Tijuana dress, representing my dual heritage. Part of the reason I adopted the Tijuana dress, as I explained before, was because it was intended to convey a sense of confidence and independence. But I also dressed that way because Diego was so proud of Mexico, and he liked that I dressed that way. He was into all things Mexicanism. His mural work dealt with Mexican society and politics, the Mexican Revolution, and he was an avid collector of indigenous art. And here he is at the Casa Azul, the backdrop of so much of our life together. It was built by my father, and it is also the place where my life began and ended. And here's Diego with a solo escuincle dog. And these dogs were like my children. All of the animals we had were. They were also part of the mythology of the indigenous cultures, and so they were very symbolic. They were often turned into statues and figurines like this one, and this is a piece from Diego's extensive collection of indigenous art. And here, workers at the Anahuacaí with the dogs. And this building was created by Diego as a museum for his collection of pre-Hispanic pieces, and it was completed after he died. And if you look at the building in the background, it was modeled after indigenous architecture. So really showing his love and allegiance for that culture. So this house, the Casa Azul, also served as a stage, fitting for two characters, like me and Diego, and for all the other personalities that came and went through the house. So I kept a lot of photographs of people that were meaningful to me so that I could keep them close to me. And this is a photograph of Leon Trotsky. Pierre Combray de Lannou. And as you can see, I would write on my photographs, leave lipstick marks on them, and mark them in other ways. And these were really intended for me and not for other people. This is Diego and his daughter. Isamu Noguchi, sculptor. This photograph was made by Edward Weston, and the inscription says, "For my darling, my love." This is me with Tina Modati in 1928. She's also a photographer. And here she is in a photograph by Edward Weston. And Tina Modati spent a lot of time in Mexico photographing, and she was involved with the Communist Party as well. This is photographer Nicholas Murray, who I had an on and off affair with for over 10 years, and he photographed me extensively. And here we are together. And many of my friends were photographers. More than anything else, photography gave me an understanding of the power of images. In front of the camera, I knew how I wanted to be portrayed. I knew how to develop a picture of myself. It was a way for me to show my strength and vitality and to be someone different from what my paintings showed. I owe my self-made character in a lot of ways to photography and the proliferation of the stories about me. And so here's Nicholas Murray in his studio, and you can see two of my paintings in the background. I also tried out photography a bit myself. These compositions that you see are certainly influenced by my modernist photography friends, the people that I was hanging out with at the time, the people that I admired. These images really speak to the things that were interesting to me and meaningful to me in my life. And some people look at this photograph and see maybe an interpretation of the accident that I was in when I was 18. And for you looking at some of these photographs from the outside, they may not have the same resonance as they do for me. I collected photographs made by my friends and the people that I admired. This is my nephew. a photograph from New York City that I made. My home of Mexico and the political struggle happening there during my lifetime was a huge influence in my life and in my art, of which perhaps there is no distinction. This is a photograph by Tina Modati titled Mexico's Revolutionary Son. The Mexican Revolution started in 1910, and it was something that I wholly identified with. It directly entered my home. My mother took care of some of the fighters on the street, the revolutionaries, and it became a metaphor of sorts for my life. A girl torn apart on the inside of her body while Mexico is torn apart on the outside. There was this outward struggle in that fight that mirrored my internal struggle. Past is always present. In the diary that I kept for the last 10 years of my life, I wrote in 1946, "Revolution is the harmony of form and color, and everything exists and moves under only one law, life. Nobody is separate from anybody else. Nobody fights for himself. Everything is all and one, anguish and pain. Pleasure and death are no more than a process for existence. The revolutionary struggle in this process is a doorway open to intelligence. Revolution and struggle, struggle and pain, pain and art." This is a photograph that my nephew made of me. On the back is written, "Frida, right after surgery in 1946, Coyoacán. She is now worse than ever. The pain is unimaginably intense." And from this point on, my health began to rapidly decline. I was in constant pain. This is one of my doctors, Dr. Juan Farid, with me in my studio in 1951. And there's a painting in the background of us together. In 1950, alone, I underwent 7 operations on my spine. After this, I was confined to my bed for most of the time. I wasn't sick, but I was broken. But I was happy as long as I could paint. In 1953, my right leg was removed at the knee due to gangrene. And here in my diary, I drew this, and it says, "Feet, what do I need them for if I have wings to fly?" I died the next year in 1954 at the age of 47. These photographs are part of who I am, and they reflect my interests, things I nurtured over the course of my life. My family, my friends, Diego and my other lovers, my body, my art, my political struggle, Mexico's pre-Hispanic past. And they're very personal pieces, probably some even more personal in some ways than the paintings that I've chosen to show to people. And I like to think of these photographs in the collection as another one of my masterpieces, inseparable from my art. And I still live on through my work, my stories, and my photographs. Viva la vida. Thank you.
Salías del templo un día, llorona, cuando al pasar yo te vi. Hermoso huipil llevabas, llorona, que la Virgen